"Let me see the bruises," Mafia boss said, then helped her undress with trembling hands. The neon open sign of the Linwood Diner cast a sickly red glow on the wet pavement, a lonely beacon in the dead hours past 2 a.m. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of old grease, stale coffee, and the sharp tang of bleach. For Elena Rivera, it was the smell of survival. She moved through the graveyard shift like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the checkerboard tiles. Her uniform, a pale blue dress that had been washed 100 times too many, hung loose on her frame, but she wore a thick, long-sleeved gray cardigan over it, even though the diner's heating was erratic. She never took the cardigan off. Every sound made her jump. A heavy-bottomed coffee mug clattered onto a saucer at the pass. Elena's shoulders shot up to her ears, her hand flying to her throat as a small, strangled gasp escaped her. "Easy, honey," mumbled Sal, the cook, his cigarette dangling from his lips as he slid a plate of congealed eggs onto the metal shelf. "Just breakfast for the damned." Elena forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Right. Sorry, Sal." She grabbed the plate, her hand trembling just enough to make the bacon vibrate. Her focus was absolute as she navigated the few empty booths to the diner's only other occupant, a trucker hunched over a well-worn map. She was a creature of practiced invisibility, of careful movements. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, her eyes always down. She kept her hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, hoping it made her look plain, forgettable. But the main thing was the bruises. She was an artist in her own right, a master of concealer and foundation, but the ones on her body were harder to hide. They were a constellation of deep, purple and sickly yellow across her ribs, a dark, thumb-shaped mark on her left bicep, and a healing cut on her scalp she hid with a careful part. Hiding them was a full-time job. The cardigan was her armor. Flinching was her reflex. The other sound that made her freeze was the rumble of a specific engine. She was wiping down the chrome counter when she heard it. The low, idling growl of a Linwood PD cruiser. It wasn't stopping, just slowing. Elena froze, her back to the window, the wet rag in her hand clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel his eyes on the diner, on her. Officer Greg Maddox, her ex-boyfriend, her stalker. The cruiser didn't stop, it just rolled by. A slow, deliberate predator's pass. It was his way of reminding her, "I am here. I am watching. You are still mine." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, the air leaving her lungs in a painful rush. The trucker grunted for more coffee, and she turned. Her composure snapped back into place like a steel trap. The diner fell back into its sleepy, grim rhythm. The clock over the kitchen ticked past 3 a.m. Sal disappeared into the back to smoke. The trucker dozed over his map. The rain outside had turned into a miserable, driving sleet. The bell over the door chimed, a thin, tinny sound that cut through the silence. Elena's head snapped up. The man who entered didn't belong. He didn't belong in the Linwood Diner, and he didn't belong in this part of the city. He was a creature from a different world, a world of shadows and steel. He was tall, dressed in a black wool overcoat that must have cost more than her apartment's rent for a year. It was tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. Beneath it, a dark suit and a crisp white shirt, buttoned to the collar. No tie. His hair was black, cut short and neat. His face was all harsh angles and Roman severity, with a strong jaw that was darkened by stubble. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, unreadable, and they swept the room once, assessing everything, the sleeping trucker, the empty counter, and finally, her. He didn't smile, he didn't leer, he just watched. He slid into the back booth, the one that faced the door. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was almost feline. It was a grace that spoke of immense, leashed power. Elena knew who he was. Everyone in Linwood knew, even if they only spoke his name in whispers. Dante Morelli, the head of the Morelli family, the mafia boss, the man who owned the docks, the unions, and, according to the rumors, half the politicians in the state. He was a myth, and he was sitting in her section. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs. This was a different kind of fear. Greg was a violent, unpredictable storm. This man was the deep, cold ocean. She picked up a menu, took a breath, and walked over. She stood a careful distance from the table. "Can I get you something?" Her voice was lower than she intended, husky with nerves. Dante Morelli looked up at her. His gaze was intense, analytical. He wasn't looking at her chest, or her face, or her hair. He was looking at her, as if he were cataloging the weariness in her posture, the tremor she couldn't hide in her hand. "Coffee," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone. It didn't have the gravelly, forced toughness of the wise guys in the movies. It was calm, controlled, black. "Right away." She turned and fled to the perceived safety of the coffee machine. Her hands were shaking badly now. She felt strangely, terrifyingly safe. It was a paradox that made her head spin. She had spent the last 8 months living in a state of high alert, flinching from every loud voice, every sudden movement, terrified of the man who wore a badge. Greg was chaos. The man in the back booth was the opposite. He was absolute, terrifying control. His presence was so powerful it seemed to absorb the diner's flickering fluorescent light, and in his stillness, Elena felt, for the first time in so long, that she could breathe. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't demanding, he was just waiting. She brought the coffee over, placing it carefully on the table. "Thank you," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. She just nodded, unable to speak, and retreated to the counter. He didn't drink the coffee. He just sat, his hands resting on the table, watching the diner, or perhaps watching her. The tension was broken by the trucker, who finally woke up, grunting. He stumbled to his feet, threw a few crumpled bills onto his table, and headed for the door, giving the man in the back booth a wide, nervous berth. As the door chimed his exit, another man entered. This one was different. He was loud, smelled of cheap whiskey, and had a mean, belligerent set to his jaw. He looked like trouble, the kind Elena dealt with every week. He staggered to the counter, slamming his hand down. "Hey, sweetheart, get me a beer and a burger, and make it quick." "I'm sorry, sir, we only serve beer until midnight," Elena said, her voice a practiced monotone. "I can get you coffee, and the grill is—" "Don't tell me what you can get me," the man snapped, leaning in. His breath was sour. "I said a beer. You got a problem with your ears?" Elena took a half step back, her armor sliding into place. "I can't serve you, sir. I think maybe you should go." "Or maybe," the man said, his eyes dropping, "you should come with me, a pretty thing like you shouldn't be working in a dump like this." He reached out fast and grabbed her wrist. Elena froze. It wasn't the pain, though his grip was tight. It was the contact, the sudden, non-consensual touch. She tried to pull back, but he held fast. "Let go of me." "Come on, baby, don't be like that." A shadow fell over them. "She told you to let go." The voice was not loud. It was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the diner like a razor. The drunk man looked up, annoyed. "Mind your own damn business, pal." Dante Morelli stood beside the counter. He hadn't seemed to move, yet here he was. He was looking at the man's hand, still wrapped around Elena's wrist. "You have 3 seconds," Dante said, his voice flat, "to take your hand off her and walk out that door." The drunk, emboldened by alcohol, scoffed. "Oh yeah? And who the hell are you?" Dante didn't answer. He simply shifted his gaze from the man's hand to the man's eyes. Elena watched it happen. She watched the drunken bluster crumble. The man's face went from red and angry to a pale, clammy white. He wasn't just looking at a well-dressed customer. He was looking at something he recognized from the darkest corners of the city. He was looking at the end of the line. His hand dropped from Elena's wrist as if it had been burned. I was just leaving," the man stammered, his hands held up. "You were—" Dante agreed. The man didn't walk. He scrambled, shoving the door open so hard it slammed into the wall and disappeared into the sleet. The diner was plunged into a deafening silence. Elena stood, rubbing her wrist, her heart feeling like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. She looked at Dante. He was already back in his booth, as if he had never moved. He lifted his coffee cup, which she knew was still full, and took a sip. She swallowed. Hard. You didn't have to do that. He was touching you, Dante said, as if that explained everything. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said, the lie automatic. She turned to grab the coffee pot, needing something to do with her hands. He was just drunk. He was a coward, Dante corrected her, his voice quiet but absolute. She brought the pot over to refill his cup. Well, thank you. As she reached for his mug, her hand trembled, and the cuff of her cardigan slid back. Just an inch. But it was enough. Dante's eyes, which had been on her face, dropped to her arm. She saw his gaze lock onto the dark, ugly bruise on her forearm, the one that matched the fingers of the man who was supposed to protect her. His entire body went utterly still. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look angry in the way Greg got angry, red-faced and explosive. He looked cold, like a block of ice. Elena snatched her arm back, pulling the sleeve down so fast she nearly spilled the coffee. It's nothing, she whispered, mortified. I'm clumsy. I bumped into a counter. She could feel him staring at her, a heavy, penetrating gaze that saw through the flimsy lie. She couldn't meet his eyes. That bruise, he said, his voice dropping so low she barely heard him. That is not from bumping into a counter. Elena froze. The pot in her hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This was more dangerous than the drunk. This was being seen. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She just stood there, exposed under the gaze of the most powerful criminal in the city. She finally set the pot down on the table, her hand shaking so badly she was afraid she'd drop it. I have to check on the kitchen. She fled, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. She hid in the back, leaning against a sack of potatoes, until her shift ended at 5 a.m. When she finally found the courage to emerge, the diner was empty. Sal was gone. The lights were dimmed, and the back booth was empty. She walked over to clear it, her legs feeling weak. His coffee cup was still there, cold, and under it, a crisp, folded $100 bill. It was far too much for a $2 coffee. Tucked beneath the bill was a small, square napkin, torn from the dispenser. He had written on it. The handwriting was strong, sharp, and black. It wasn't a proposition. It wasn't a threat. It was a phone number. And beneath it, a simple line. If you ever want out, call me. I don't scare easy. Elena stared at the words. A dozen different kinds of fear warred inside her. This was madness. Trading one monster for another, getting involved with a man like Dante Morelli was a death sentence. But Greg was the law. He had the badge. He had the power. Who stopped a man like him? Her fingers closed around the napkin. She looked at the $100 bill. She couldn't take it. It felt like a payment. She left the money, but the napkin. She slid the napkin deep into the pocket of her jeans. It felt heavy, like a stone or a key. She clocked out, pulling her thin jacket tight around her as she stepped into the cold, pre-dawn gray. The walk home was always the worst. The streets were empty, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Tonight, the threat was real. She saw his cruiser parked halfway down her block. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He was waiting for her in the darkened entryway of her apartment building, leaning against the mailboxes. Working late, Elena? She jumped, her hand flying to her chest. Greg, you scared me. He stepped out of the shadows, his officer's uniform immaculate, his smile a cruel slash. He smelled of stale beer and false authority. Just making sure my girl gets home safe, he said, his voice a sickening parody of concern. It's a dangerous neighborhood. I'm fine. Greg, I'm just tired. She tried to push past him to get to the stairs. He blocked her path, his body a solid, immovable wall. His smile faded. I saw you got a new customer tonight, a real high roller. Dante Morelli. Elena's blood turned to ice. He was just a customer. I served him coffee. Just coffee, Greg mimicked, his voice turning ugly. You shouldn't be serving men like that. Elena, you should be home. This is my job. Greg, you know I need it. You need me, he snapped. his control breaking. "And I don't like you flirting with criminals." The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. "I wasn't flirting, I was working." "Don't lie to me." He grabbed her, his fingers digging into her arms, and slammed her back against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from her, and her head cracked against the plaster. "You're mine," he hissed, his face inches from hers, his spit hitting her cheek. "You belong to me, not to some gutter trash gangster. You hear me?" He shook her, hard. His fingers were digging into the exact same bruise on her arm that Dante had seen. Elena cried out, a small, choked sound, biting her lip to keep from screaming. She kept one hand behind her back, hidden from his view. Her fingers were clenched tight, her nails digging into her own palm. He held her there for a long, agonizing moment, his eyes filled with a terrifying, possessive rage. Then, as quickly as it came, the rage passed. He let go, smoothing his uniform. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his voice calm again. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, right where she was already starting to swell. "Be good." He turned and walked out, his boots echoing in the silent lobby. Elena waited until she heard the cruiser drive away. She fumbled for her keys, her entire body shaking so hard she could barely fit the key in the lock. She stumbled into her apartment, slamming the deadbolt, sliding the chain, and leaning her forehead against the cheap wood of the door, gasping for air. Tears of rage and pain streamed down her face. Her hand was still behind her back. Slowly, painfully, she uncurled her fingers. Lying in her sweaty, indented palm was the napkin. Crushed, damp, and wrinkled, but still readable. "I don't scare easy." She clutched it, her only life raft in a sea of despair, and sank to the floor. The cracked bathroom mirror showed Elena a stranger. It was 4 p.m, and the weak November light did nothing to soften the damage. Her left eye was swollen, the skin beneath it a hideous, blooming purple that darkened to black near the lash line. Her lip was split, a small, dried cut that pulled every time she moved her mouth. Her head throbbed where it had hit the wall. She stood for a long time, just staring. This was Greg's signature. This was the reminder that she was his property. With a sigh that felt like it was scraping her bruised ribs, she opened the medicine cabinet. The ritual began. She pulled out a cheap, plastic-wrapped ice pack, wrapped it in a thin towel, and held it to her eye, wincing at the cold pressure. She did this for 10 minutes, until the swelling felt a little less hot. Then came the makeup. It was a thick, stage-quality concealer, a pasty, yellow-toned cream designed to counteract the deep purple. She dabbed it on gently, her fingers light, hissing as she touched the tender skin. Then came the foundation, 2 shades darker than her real skin tone, layered on top, then powder, to set it all, to create the flat, matte illusion of normalcy. It was a mask, a heavy, clumsy one. It didn't look right. It looked like a woman with a secret, a woman hiding something ugly. It wouldn't fool anyone up close, but it was all she had. Her hand went to the pocket of her jeans, draped over the toilet. Her fingers closed around the crumpled napkin. She pulled it out, smoothing it on the sink. The numbers were stark and black. I don't scare easy. She had been staring at it all day. She had picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the keypad, at least a dozen times. What would she even say? "Hi, Mr. Mafia boss. My cop ex-boyfriend is trying to kill me. Can you help?" It was insane. He was a criminal. He dealt in drugs or guns or whatever men like him dealt in. Men like him didn't help waitresses for free. There was always a price, and she had a horrifying suspicion of what that price would be. But then she looked in the mirror again. Greg was a cop. He had a badge. He had the entire system on his side. Who could she report him to? His friends? His boss? Who golfed with him on Sundays? She was trapped. There was no one on her side. No one who could fight a man who was the law, except, perhaps, a man who lived above it. She tucked the napkin back into her pocket, the debate still raging in her head. She was still too afraid to call, but she was becoming more afraid not to. She put on her uniform, her cardigan, and went to work. The diner was slow, just a few lost souls staring into empty cups. Sal, the cook, gave her a long look as she clocked in. "Walk into a door, Elena?" he grunted, not unkindly. "A cabinet," she lied, her voice flat. "It was dark." "Yeah," he said, turning back to his grill. "Gotta watch out for those cabinets." She spent the first few hours on edge, her nerves screaming. Every time the bell over the door chimed, her heart leaped into her throat. She spilled a cup of coffee, her hand shaking so badly that hot liquid sloshed over the rim, scalding her fingers. She barely felt it. It was almost 3 a.m. when the bell chimed, and he walked in. Dante Morelli. He looked exactly the same as the night before. The dark wool coat, the expensive suit, the air of absolute, chilling control. He slid into the same booth, the one that faced the door. This time, he didn't wait. He looked directly at her. Her hand flew up to her cheek, a pathetic, instinctive gesture to hide the makeup, to hide the shame. She took a breath and walked over. Coffee pot in hand, she stood at his table, her eyes fixed on the tabletop. "Coffee," she whispered. "Please." She poured. Her hand was shaking so violently that the cup rattled in the saucer. She saw him watch the tremor, his dark eyes missing nothing. He didn't look at the bad makeup job. He looked right into her good eye, as if he could see the terror behind it. She set the pot down on the table, needing to use both hands. Sal was in the back, the radio playing a low, mournful country song. They were the only 2 people in the room. "I can fix problems," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that didn't carry. It was for her alone. "You just have to ask." It was too much. The kindness, the offer, the sheer, impossible danger of it all, layered on top of the pain and the fear. Her control snapped, her head snapped up, and she met his gaze, her good eye blazing with a sudden, desperate fury. "Fix problems?" she hissed, her voice low and shaking. "What kind of problems? Mr. Morelli? You mean like a clumsy waitress? Is that what you think this is?" She gestured to her own face. "I'm nobody. I'm a waitress in a 24-hour dump. Why would you care? What do you want from me?" She knew she was being reckless, speaking this way to this man, but she was so tired of being afraid. Dante didn't flinch. He didn't look angry or offended. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. He took a long, slow sip of the coffee. He set the cup down with a quiet, deliberate click. "Because no one did for my mother," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "And I have hated cowards ever since." The words struck her silent. It wasn't an answer. It was a confession. A small, dark key to a room she hadn't known existed. He wasn't talking about her. He was talking about himself. She stared at him, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow confusion. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a clip of bills, and peeled off 2, dropping them on the table. It was far too much. Again. He stood up, shrugging into his coat. He paused, looking down at her. "The offer stands, Elena," he said. And then he was gone, the bell chiming his exit, leaving her standing alone in the silence, his cryptic words echoing in her ears. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Her fear was now mixed with a strange, unsettling hope. The walk home was torture. Every shadow was Greg. Every approaching set of headlights was his cruiser. But she made it to her building, up the stairs, and to her door without incident. She unlocked the 3 locks she had installed, a deadbolt, a chain, and a flimsy slide bolt. They were useless, she knew. A comforting illusion. Her apartment was cold, the air still. She leaned against the door, her eyes closed, just breathing, a sound, a key. Her eyes flew open. She watched in frozen, abject terror as the deadbolt turned. From the outside. He wasn't supposed to have a key. She had changed the locks. She had paid a locksmith in cash. The knob turned. The door pushed open, stopping with a sharp crack as the metal chain caught. A dark eye appeared in the gap. "Elena?" Greg's voice. Not raging, not angry. Soft, wheedling. The voice he used before he got what he wanted. "Elena? Honey, open the door. I just want to talk." "Go away, Greg," she screamed, backing away from the door. "I'll call the police." A dry, harsh laugh came from the other side. "I am the police, you stupid girl. Now, open the door. No, get out, leave me alone." There was a heavy sigh, then a splintering crash. He didn't pick the lock. He kicked the door. The cheap pine frame shattered, the chain ripping free from the wood. He stood in the doorway, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't drunk this time. This was worse. This was cold, sober rage. "I saw him leave again," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "He was there for 10 minutes. What did you two talk about?" "He's just a customer. Greg, we talked about coffee." She was backing up, her hands held out in front of her, trying to find a path, an escape. The living room was a box. There was nowhere to go. Liar. He stepped inside, closing the broken door behind him. "You're screwing him, aren't you? You left me. A decorated officer. For that piece of filth. I left you because you hit me." It was the first time she had said it out loud to him. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. His face changed. The calm mask cracked. "I hit you," he whispered, "because you deserved it, because you don't listen." He advanced, and she retreated, until her back hit the wall. "Greg, please," she begged. "Don't. You think he can protect you," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You think that gangster scum is going to save you? I'll put a bullet in his head and call it a righteous bust." He grabbed her, his hands clamping down on her shoulders. He shook her, rattling her teeth. "You're mine," he hissed. "You belong to me." He threw her. She stumbled, crashing into the small, rickety table by the wall. The lamp she had bought at a thrift store toppled over, its bulb shattering on the floor. "No!" she screamed, scrambling, trying to get up. He was on her, dragging her up by her hair. His other hand balled into a fist. "You're going to learn. Elena," he panted, his eyes wide and unhinged. "You're going to learn. Once and for all." He threw her again, harder this time, against the thin drywall that separated her apartment from her neighbors. Her head hit the wall with a sickening, hollow thud. The world went white, then black at the edges. She crumpled to the floor, dazed. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard it. Bang, bang, bang. A loud, insistent pounding on the adjoining wall. "Hey," a voice yelled, old and reedy. "What in God's name is going on in there? I'm calling the cops. Maddox, I mean it this time." "Mr. Henderson," her elderly neighbor. Greg froze. He looked at the wall, then at Elena, bleeding on his floor. The fog of his rage cleared, replaced instantly by the cold calculation of a man protecting his career. "Shut up, old man," he yelled at the wall. He turned back to Elena, his face twisted in disgust. He ran a hand through his hair, smoothing it down. He adjusted his duty belt. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice a low promise. "You clean this mess up." He yanked the broken door open and stormed out, his heavy boots pounding down the hallway. Elena lay on the floor for a long time. The only sound was her own ragged, shallow breathing. Blood was trickling from a cut on her scalp, matting in her hair. Her split lip was bleeding again. The room was a wreck. Her life was a wreck. She was going to die here. He would come back. He would come back. And one day, he would finish the job. With a groan, she rolled onto her hands and knees. The room spun. She crawled, like an animal, across the floor to the chair where her jeans were. Her fingers, slick and sticky, fumbled in the pocket, the napkin. She pulled it out. It was crumpled and damp with her sweat. "I don't scare easy." She looked at her phone. Its screen cracked, lying on the floor near the shattered lamp. There was no choice. Not anymore. She crawled to the phone. Her fingers left bloody smears on the screen as she punched in the numbers, one by one. It rang once. A deep voice answered. "Not hello? Just yes." She opened her mouth, but a broken, wet sob was the only sound that came out. There was a silence on the other end. Not static, a heavy, listening silence. Then, his voice, different, softer. "Elena?" She choked back the sob, her throat raw. "Is your—" She gasped, her voice a tiny, broken whisper. "Is your offer still open?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. It stretched for 3 beats, 4. "Where are you?" His voice was no longer soft. It was flat, it was cold, it was the deadliest sound she had ever heard. "My apartment," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the blood. He came. He just left. He broke the door." "I know where it is," Dante said. "Stay away from the windows. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line clicked dead. 20 minutes. He lived on the other side of the city, in the wealthy district. 20 minutes was impossible. It was less than 15. A black, gleaming SUV. So quiet it seemed to glide on the darkness. Pulled up to the curb. It had no lights on. It just appeared. 2 men in dark suits got out. They didn't look at the building. They scanned the street, their hands disappearing inside their jackets. The back door opened, and Dante Morelli stepped out. He looked up, his gaze finding her window instantly, as if he knew she'd be watching. He didn't run. He walked, a long, measured, predator's stride, into her building. She heard no footsteps in the hall, just a quiet, firm rap on her shattered door. Tap, tap, tap. She stumbled to her feet, her legs shaking, and pulled it open. He stood in the entryway, filling it. His 2 men flanked the hallway, a wall of dark, silent muscle. Dante's eyes took in the room in one swift, cold glance, the broken lamp, the shattered frame of the door, the blood on the floor, and then his eyes landed on her. His face, always so controlled, became a mask of such profound, cold rage that she took an instinctive step back. He didn't say a word. He stepped inside, shrugging off his heavy cashmere coat. He didn't ask if she was okay. Oh, he didn't ask what happened. He knew. He draped the coat over her shoulders. She was trembling, dressed only in her thin work leggings and a t-shirt. The coat was impossibly warm, heavy as armor, and it smelled of clean wool, expensive cologne, and something faintly metallic, like cold steel. "We're leaving," he said. My things," she whispered. "My purse." "They are just things," he said. His voice clipped. "We will get you new things." He bent, and before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed nothing to him. He lifted her as if she were a child, one arm under her knees, the other securely around her back. She gasped, her hands flying up to clutch at the lapels of his suit jacket. "My neighbors," she whispered, panicked, her face pressing into his shoulder. "They'll see me." "Let them," he said. But as he carried her out of the apartment, Mr. Henderson's door creaked open, just a crack. An eye peered out. Dante didn't slow his stride. He simply shifted her in his arms, turning her body, and pressed her face gently but firmly into the hollow of his neck. "Close your eyes, Elena," he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. She did. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, and let the world disappear. He carried her down the stairs, through the lobby, and out into the cold night air. He put her in the back of the SUV, the leather seats cold on her skin, before sliding in beside her. The door shut with a solid, heavy thud, sealing them in complete silence. The drive was silent. Dante sat beside her, not touching her, a rigid line of barely leashed fury. He spoke on his phone, a rapid, low stream of Italian. She didn't understand a single word, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of orders being given. It was the sound of destruction. They entered a private garage, the door sliding shut behind them, and rode a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling apartment. It was a penthouse, vast and cold, all black marble, chrome, and glass. The entire wall was a window, a glittering panorama of the city lights far below. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying room she had ever seen. Dante walked past her, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He pressed a button, and heavy, dark curtains slid across the glass, blotting out the city, encasing them in a sudden, quiet darkness, soft. Warm lights flickered on, illuminating pools of the cavernous room. Elena stood by the elevator, a small, bleeding, broken thing, clutching his coat around her. He disappeared and returned with a glass of water. His hand was perfectly steady. He gave it to her. He pulled a heavy chair, placing it directly in front of the low sofa where she had perched. He sat, his knees almost touching hers, and he waited. He sat in the profound silence, his dark eyes fixed on her, and just let her breathe. He didn't rush her. He didn't question her. He gave her the one thing she had not had in years, a moment of peace. The silence stretched. Her tremors began to subside. Finally, he spoke. His voice was so soft, it was almost a physical touch. "Let me see the bruises." It was not a command. It was not a request. It was a plea, dragged from somewhere deep inside him. And it broke her. The wall she had lived behind, the dam that held back years of terror and pain. It didn't just crack, it shattered. A wail tore from her throat, a raw animal sound of such profound, bottomless grief that it shocked her. She dropped the glass. Dante caught it before it hit the floor, setting it aside without a sound. She collapsed, folding in on herself, the sobs ripping through her, choking her. In an instant, he was off the chair. He was on his knees, in his immaculate $1,000 suit. He was kneeling on the marble floor in front of her. "Elena," he said, and his voice was rough, wrecked. "I'm sorry," she gasped, the tears blinding her. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." "Shh, no," he commanded, his voice shaking. "Do not apologize. Not for this. Not to me." He reached out, his large, powerful hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. She could see them. They were trembling. This man, who was a myth of violence and power, was trembling for her. "Your sweater," he said, his voice thick. "He hurt you. Please, let me see." She was still wearing her gray cardigan, her armor. It was stained and torn. She looked at him, kneeling before her, his eyes dark with a pain that was a mirror of her own. She gave a small, jerky nod. His movements were infinitely slow, infinitely careful. His calloused, large hands touched the hem of the sweater. His touch was so gentle. It was an absence of pain. He eased the fabric up her arms. She lifted them, her body aching, her sobs quieting to small, hiccuping gasps. He pulled the cardigan off, over her head, and tossed it to the floor as if it were contaminated. She was left in her thin t-shirt. It was streaked with blood and dirt. He didn't have to lift it. The fabric clung to her, revealing the geography of her pain, the deep, angry purple that covered her ribs, the fresh, red handprint on her shoulder, the constellation of older, fading yellow bruises. Dante's breath hissed out of him. He made a low, guttural sound, deep in his chest. He reached out one finger, tracing the outline of the largest bruise on her side, but his finger didn't touch her skin. It hovered, a fraction of an inch above, vibrating with the force of his tremor. Elena flinched, bracing for the impact, for the pain. He snatched his hand back as if she had burned him. He looked up, from her broken body to her tear-streaked face. His eyes were black, bottomless, and glittering with a cold, terrifying rage. He cupped her face, his thumbs gently, impossibly, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "This," he said, his voice shaking with a fury she had only ever dreamed of someone feeling on her behalf. "This ends now." Elena woke up to the smell of coffee. It was a rich, dark roast, not the burnt, acidic sludge from the diner. She was aware of two things, one after the other. First, she was not in pain. Her head still throbbed, a dull, distant ache, but the sharp, stabbing terror of the night before was gone. Second, she was lying on sheets so soft they felt like cool water against her skin. She opened her eyes. The room was not hers. It was vast, painted in a soft cream color, with sunlight streaming in through a slit in heavy, plush curtains. The bed she was in was large enough to hold 6 people. She looked down at herself. She was wearing a robe. It was made of thick, heavy silk, the color of a deep emerald. She had no memory of putting it on. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She sat up too fast. The room spun, and she cried out, her hand flying to her head. A quiet, older voice spoke from the corner. "Easy, Kara, easy. You are quite safe." Elena's head snapped toward the sound. A man was sitting in a chair by the window. He was in his 60s, with a kind, wrinkled face, silver hair, and a tweed jacket. He held a small, black medical bag on his lap. Who are you?" Elena whispered, clutching the robe tight. "Where am I?" "My name is Dr. Alessi," he said, his voice a gentle, accented rumble. "And you are in Mr. Morelli's home. He called me. I looked at you last night, while you were sleeping." Elena's hand went to the back of her head. She felt the slight sting of antiseptic and the rough texture of a small, square bandage. "You have a concussion," the doctor said, standing up slowly, as if not to frighten her. "Not a severe one, but you will have a headache for a few days. I stitched a small cut on your scalp, 2 stitches. They will dissolve. And your ribs, they are badly bruised. See, but not broken. You were lucky." Lucky. The word was a bitter joke. Did you undress me?" she asked, the question coming out in a small, horrified whisper. "Oh, no," he said quickly, his eyes wide with reassurance. "Mr. Morelli has a woman, an older woman who works for him, Mrs. Bianchi. She came. She bathed you and dressed you in this." He gestured to the robe. "I only looked at your head, your ribs. With her in the room, I promise you, Signorina, you were treated only with respect." Elena absorbed this. A housekeeper, a doctor who made house calls in the middle of the night, a silk robe. This was a world she could not comprehend. "I gave you a mild sedative for the pain and the shock. Doctor," Alessi continued, snapping his bag shut, "you have been asleep for almost 12 hours. Mr. Morelli insisted. He said you hadn't truly slept in a long time." The simple observation, the fact that Dante had seen that in her, made her throat tighten. "He is in the kitchen," the doctor said, moving toward the door. "He asked me to let him know when you were awake. There are clothes for you in the closet, simple things. Nothing fancy, but clean. And breakfast is ready. If you feel you can eat." He paused at the door, his kind, professional eyes settling on her. "I did not ask what happened. Child, that is not my business. But my business is healing, and I will tell you this. I have known Dante Morelli since he was a boy. He's a complicated man, but he has never, not once, lied to me. You are safer in this house than in any in this city." He closed the door softly behind him, leaving Elena alone in the silence, his words hanging in the air. She forced herself to stand. Her legs were shaky. The silk robe felt alien and impossibly luxurious against her bruised skin. She walked to the closet and opened it. Inside were not gowns or fur coats. There were 3 pairs of soft, gray sweatpants, 3 plain, black t-shirts, a stack of new packaged socks and underwear, and a pair of simple, fuzzy slippers. It was the most thoughtful, considerate thing anyone had ever done for her. It was not a gift of lingerie. It was not a trap. It was a gift of comfort, of normalcy. Tears pricked her eyes as she pulled on the soft clothes, which were a size too big but felt like armor. She found him on a sprawling, enclosed terrace that overlooked the city. The glass walls were thick, muffling the sounds of the world below. He was standing by a counter, pouring coffee, his back to her. He was dressed not in a suit, but in dark trousers and a simple black Henley shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders and emphasized the lean, powerful muscles in his back and arms. He looked less like a boss and more like a fighter. She stood in the doorway, her hands tucked into the pockets of the sweatpants. "Doctor, Alessi said you were awake," he said, not turning. "Are you hungry?" "A little," she whispered. He turned, and her breath caught. In the daylight, he was almost overwhelming. His presence was so intense, it seemed to suck the air from her side of the room. His dark eyes were fixed on her, cataloging the clean clothes, the pale, drawn face, the way she was hugging herself for protection. "Sit," he said. Gesturing to a small table set for 2, there was fruit, sliced and fanned on a platter, a basket of fresh bread, eggs, and the coffee. He didn't sit with her. He gave her space, moving to the far side of the terrace, leaning against the glass and drinking his own coffee, looking out at the city. He was giving her room to eat, room to breathe, without the pressure of his scrutiny. She ate, forcing herself. The food was delicious. Every bite was a reminder that she was alive, that she was here. After a few minutes of silence, she couldn't take it anymore. She set her fork down. "Who are you?" He turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. "You know who I am," he said. "No, I know what they call you," she countered, her voice gaining a small amount of strength. "I know the whispers, but I don't know you. Why? Why did you do this? No one does this. Not for free." He turned fully, his face impassive, but his eyes were dark. He walked over and sat down in the chair opposite her. He leaned forward, his forearms on the table, his presence suddenly focused, intense. "I run the kind of business," he said, his voice low, "that cleans up what the police ignore, or, in your case, what the police cause." "You're a criminal," she stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a clarification. "I am," he agreed, without shame. "I am a man who believes in a different kind of justice, a more immediate justice. The law. The law is slow, and it favors the men who wear the right uniforms. I favor the people who have no one else." "And the women?" she whispered. Why did you say that about your mother?" His face, which had been open, shuddered. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white as he clasped them on the table. "My father," he said, his voice a gravelly, pained rasp, "was not a good man. He was weak. He was a coward. And my mother, she paid the price for it, every day. I was a child. I was small. I watched and I listened, and I did nothing." He looked up, and the raw, cold grief in his eyes was so profound it almost knocked her backward. "I am a very, very bad man. Elena, I have done things you would have nightmares about, but I do not hurt women, and I end the men who do." The finality in his voice was absolute. "I end the men who do." It was not a boast. It was a fact, as simple as the sun rising. Elena fell silent. She believed him. She believed every single terrifying word. They fell into a strange, quiet rhythm over the next few days. He was gone for long stretches, and the penthouse was silent, save for the occasional muffled footsteps of Mrs. Bianchi, who would leave trays of food outside Elena's door. When Dante was home, the silence was different. It was a shared, living thing. He had a library, not a shelf of books, but a library. 2 stories, all dark wood, leather, and the smell of old paper. He would sit at a massive desk, reading ledgers or speaking in low, rapid Italian on the phone. Elena would curl up in a large leather armchair by the unlit fireplace, reading a novel she had pulled from the shelf. She hadn't read a novel in years. Sometimes she would watch him. He was a man of contrasts. He could be utterly still, like a panther in a tree, and then he would move with a sudden, fluid grace. He never made a loud noise. He never slammed a door, and he never raised his voice. One afternoon, he was on the phone, and the conversation was clearly heated. He was speaking in Italian, his voice getting lower, colder. Elena, lost in her book, had forgotten her own rules. A car horn blared from the street, 30 stories below, and she flinched, dropping the book with a clatter. Dante's head snapped up. The angry, cold mask was gone. He was on his feet in an instant. "Basta," he snapped into the phone, killing the call. He was at her side before she could even take a breath. "What is it? Are you all right?" "The horn," she whispered, mortified, her heart hammering. It was just a car horn. I'm sorry." He didn't say. "It's just a noise." He didn't say. "Calm down." He knelt in front of her chair, just as he had done that first night. His large, warm hand settled on her knee, over the sweatpants. His touch was firm, grounding. "You are safe here," he said, his voice a low vibration. "Nothing here will hurt you. Not a sound. Not a shadow. I promise you." He stayed there, kneeling, until her breathing evened out, his hand on her knee, a silent, powerful anchor. Another time. They were eating a late dinner at the kitchen island. Mrs. Bianchi had left a pot of rich, savory stew. Elena, feeling more human, was talking. She was telling him about her childhood, about growing up in Arizona, about the smell of the desert after a rain. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her, his gaze steady and focused, as if he were memorizing the information. She was describing her high school art teacher when she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the dark window. She was smiling. And then she laughed, a real, small, rusty laugh. The sound shocked her. She hadn't heard it in so long. Dante's face, which had been unreadably stoic, softened at the edges. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched his own lips. "That is a good sound," he said quietly. The intimacy of the moment, the quiet domesticity, was overwhelming. That night, she couldn't sleep. She found him on the terrace, staring at the city. "I can't stay here," she said, her voice small. He turned to her. "Why? I'm trouble. He's a cop. He's not going to stop. He'll find me. He'll find you. You're a criminal. But he's worse. He's legal. He'll come at you with the law. I can't drag you into this." Dante's expression was calm. "He crossed the line the moment he touched you. This is my business now." "But you don't understand," she insisted, her voice rising in panic. "He's obsessed. He's crazy. He'll—" "Elena," he stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "Look at me. Do I seem worried?" She looked into his eyes. They were dark and calm as a deep lake. "He is a street-level bully with a badge. I am something else. He has his rules. I have mine. My rules are older, and they are better." He reached out, his finger tracing the fading, yellow-green edge of the bruise on her cheek. "His mistake was thinking you were his. He was wrong. You are mine to protect. That makes him my business, and I always take care of my business. He was a monster. He was a killer, and he was a criminal, and he was the only man who had ever made her feel safe. The next night, he cooked. He sent Mrs. Bianchi home. He opened a bottle of deep red wine. He moved around the massive, professional kitchen with an expertise that surprised her. "I thought you just had people for this," she said, perched on a stool, nursing a glass of wine. The headache was gone. The bruises were fading. "I have people for things I don't want to do," he said, not looking up as he chopped garlic with a terrifyingly large knife. "I enjoy this." He made a simple, perfect pasta. They ate at the formal dining table, a massive slab of dark wood that could have seated 20. They sat at one end, close together, the single candelabra he had lit casting a warm, flickering glow, the wine, the food, the warmth. It all conspired to lower her defenses. They talked. He told her about his grandfather, who had come from Sicily with nothing and built a small bakery. He didn't talk about what came after. She told him about her dream, the one she hadn't admitted to anyone in years, the dream of being an artist, a painter. "I still have my paints. You know," she whispered, staring into the candle flame. "In my apartment, I couldn't leave them. They're under the bed." His eyes darkened. "I will get them for you." No, you can't. It's too dangerous." "Nothing," he said, his voice flat, "is too dangerous." After dinner, they moved to the living room. He put on music, not opera, as she might have expected, but old, scratchy, soulful jazz. They sat on the sofa, a glass of wine between them. The silence was comfortable now, charged but comfortable. Dante turned to her. He reached out, his hand open on the cushion between them, a clear, simple invitation. She looked at his hand. It was large, scarred, the knuckles on his right hand slightly misshapen. It was the hand of a man who had fought. It was the hand that had trembled when he saw her bruises, slowly, her heart hammering. She placed her small, trembling hand in his fingers closed around hers, enveloping her in warmth and rough, calloused strength. He didn't grab, he didn't pull, he just held. He raised her hand, never taking his eyes from hers, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. A soft, warm, reverent kiss. He leaned in. He was impossibly, overwhelmingly male. The scent of his skin, the heat coming off his body, the intensity of his gaze. "Elena," he whispered. He was moving slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, to say no. She didn't. She tilted her chin up. Her eyes fluttered closed. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of violence. or of possession, or of hunger. It was a kiss of profound, staggering relief. It was slow, it was respectful, it was a question. She responded, her lips parting, a small sigh escaping her. That was all the permission he needed. His other hand came up, cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her unbruised cheek. The kiss deepened. It was still slow, still gentle. But now there was a spark, a low, simmering heat. She felt a tremor run through her, a mix of fear and a desire she had thought was dead. She was trembling in his arms. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm on her face. "You don't have to be strong with me," he whispered, his voice rough. He kissed her again, and this time she kissed him back. Her hands, which had been frozen at her sides, came up. One clutched his shirt, the other found its way to his neck, her fingers tangling in the short, soft hair at his nape. The kiss deepened, became hungrier. It was the first kiss of her new life, and then a flash. The scent of his cologne was replaced by the sour smell of beer. His gentle touch was replaced by a brutal grip. His warm lips were replaced by Greg's snarling, wet mouth. She gasped, her entire body going rigid. She pushed hard. No! Dante was gone. Instantly. He didn't stumble. He didn't ask why. He moved back, putting a foot of space between them, and dropped his hands. "Elena," he said, his voice level, but his breathing was heavy. She was curled into a ball on the sofa, her hands over her face, shaking. "I'm sorry, I saw him, I can't." She was a broken, pathetic thing. He was going to throw her out. He was going to be disgusted. A moment passed. Then his hand settled on her head. Not her face, not her body. Her head, a safe, non-threatening touch. His fingers were heavy, warm. "I'll wait." She looked up at him through her tears. His face was not angry. It was not impatient. It was sad and resolute. "I'll wait," he repeated. "As long as it takes." He stood, offering her his hand, not for a kiss, but to help her up. She took it. He led her to his bedroom, not the guest room. The room was dark, the bed massive. She tensed. I can't." "No," he said. "Just sleep. You need to sleep. I will be here." He pulled back the covers. He didn't undress. He just sat, his back against the headboard, watching her, numbly. She climbed in. The bed was vast, but she stayed on the very edge. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Every muscle in her body tensed, waiting for the attack. He made no move. He just sat, a silent guardian. The minutes ticked by. 10, 20, an hour. He didn't move. His breathing was a low, steady, reassuring rhythm in the dark. She was so tired. Her eyelids were heavy. Slowly, inch by inch, she uncurled. She turned on her side, facing him. He was still sitting up, a dark, powerful silhouette against the city lights. She shuffled closer. She rested her head on his thigh, on the hard, solid muscle. She was not sexual. She was like a child, seeking comfort. She felt his hand, still on her head, begin to stroke her hair. A slow, rhythmic, comforting motion. "You're safe," he whispered into the darkness. "He will never touch you again." She clutched the fabric of his trousers in her fist, and for the first time in more than a year, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, curled under his arm, under his protection. The penthouse, once a silent, gilded cage, had transformed. It was now a war room. Dante Morelli did not conduct his business in the open, but in the hushed, wood-paneled quiet of his 2-story library. He waged his campaign. The city was a chessboard, and he was moving his pieces. Elena sat on the leather Chesterfield sofa, a cup of tea she didn't want clasped in her hands, and watched. She was no longer a guest. She was a witness. Men came and went, all of them like Dante, quiet, dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits, speaking in low voices. They called him Capo. They brought him files, envelopes, and whispered reports. "The target is Officer Gregory Maddox. Dante had said to his chief lieutenant, a sharp, older man named Nico, on the first day. I want him undone. I want every secret, every sin, every shadow. I want his career, his shield, and his pension. I want the ground beneath his feet to turn to dust. He had said it with the calm, flat finality of a judge passing sentence, and Elena had shivered. Now, 3 days later, the dust was being gathered. He's dirty. Capo, Nico said, laying a series of grainy photographs on the massive desk. But he's not stupid. He's been using his badge to cover a small-time drug operation, skimming from busts, selling to a mid-level dealer named Spider. Elena, who had been trying to read, looked up. Spider? She whispered. Dante turned his head, his gaze sharp. You know that name? Greg arrested him. Twice, she said, her voice shaking as she stood and approached the desk. But he was always out. A day later, Greg said. He said Spider was his best informant, a CI. Dante looked at Nico, who gave a small, appreciative nod. The CI who pays him 10% of his weekly take, Nico supplied. There's more. 2 years ago, an internal affairs complaint, excessive force. The victim was a young woman who claimed Maddox had assaulted her during a traffic stop. The case was dropped. Lack of evidence. The woman moved to another state a week later. He paid her off, Dante said, his voice a low growl. Or scared her off, Elena whispered, her blood running cold. She was looking at the photographs. One was of Greg, in uniform, getting into his cruiser. The other was of a low-lit bar, the Rusty Nail. I know that place, she said, her finger hovering over the photo. Greg used to meet his friends there, other cops, but he always went to the back room to talk business. Dante's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a heavy, warm, grounding presence. His thumb stroked the joint of her collarbone, a small, silent message. You are doing well. That small, simple touch gave her strength. He keeps a second ledger, she said, the memory flooding back. Not a book, a flash drive, a small, black one. He kept it in his apartment. When he moved out, he took it with him. He said it was his insurance policy. Dante looked at Nico. Find it. It's hard, Capo, Nico said. His apartment, his cruiser, they are fortresses. Then find a key, Dante ordered. Find a weakness. Elena helped them map the geography of her abuser, the names of his few friends, the shift rotation he preferred, the way he took his coffee. Every detail she had been forced to memorize to survive was now a weapon she was handing to Dante. It was hard. It felt like digging in her own wounds, but every time she faltered, Dante's steady gaze would find hers, his eyes telling her, this is his end. You are safe. The weakness was found not by Dante's men, but by Maddox himself. He was desperate. Elena had disappeared. He had called her. He had texted. He had gone to the diner, but Sal had just shrugged and said she'd quit. He had stalked her apartment building, but the broken door had been replaced, and no one had seen her. So, he used his power. Nico brought the news the next afternoon. He walked into the library where Elena was reading and Dante was on the phone, and he simply turned on the large, flat-screen television. A local news anchor was on the screen. And in Linwood, police are asking for the public's help in locating a missing woman. Elena's face flashed on the screen. It was her diner ID photo, a terrible, grainy picture, where she looked both tired and terrified. Elena Rivera, the anchor read, 28, was last seen leaving her apartment 3 days ago. Her ex-boyfriend, Officer Greg Maddox, filed the report, stating he is deeply concerned for her welfare. Elena stood up, the book sliding from her lap. He's appealing to the public, the anchor continued, worried she may have fallen in with a dangerous element. They cut to a photo of Greg, looking concerned, his uniform crisp, the American flag on his shoulder. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. He's hunting me. He's using the police. He's put my face everywhere. He wins. He's a cop. He's a dead man. Dante was standing beside her. He had ended his call. He was watching the television, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. He thinks he's smart, Dante said. his voice a low vibration. He thinks he's using his system, but he just made a mistake. He's made himself the center of the story, the concerned ex-boyfriend. He's put a spotlight on himself. He turned to Nico. He wants to be in the news? Put him in the news? The file? Nico asked, a predatory gleam in his eye. All of it, Dante said. The drugs, the payoffs, the assault complaint from 2 years ago. I want a copy of that insurance flash drive on my desk by morning. And I want the original sent to Sarah Jensen at the Tribune, the one who hates dirty cops. But how will you... Elena began. Dante looked at her. He just gave us his weakness. He's so worried about you. He's not worried about me. He thinks he's the hunter. He has forgotten what a real predator looks like. Dante's words, his absolute, terrifying confidence, did not calm the fear, but it banked it. He was not worried. He was working. That night, the tension in the penthouse was different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was the eye of the storm. Elena couldn't sleep. She paced the living room, watching the city lights. Every pair of headlights a potential threat. Maddox's move had been brilliant in its own sociopathic way. He had made her a public fugitive. If she was seen, she'd be rescued and returned to him. She felt the net closing. Dante found her on the terrace, her arms wrapped around her waist, staring down at the city. He didn't speak. He just came to stand beside her, a solid, warm presence in the cold, glass-enclosed room. She was the one who broke the silence. He's going to find me. No, Dante said. He will. He always does. Men like him, they don't stop. And men like me, Dante countered, turning to face her. Don't lose. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She looked at his face, the strong line of his jaw, the unreadable depth of his eyes. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and he was the only thing standing between her and a living hell. Why? She whispered, the question torn from her. You have your men. You have your business. Why are you doing all this for me? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. Because, he said, his voice rough, when he put his hands on you, he took something that was not his to take. And because when I look at you, I see something that deserves to be protected. He reached out, not to touch her, but to trace the line of her jaw in the air, his fingers hovering an inch from her skin. She was the one who moved. She closed the distance. She leaned into his touch, pressing her cheek into his palm. It was a gesture of absolute, terrifying trust. His hand was rough, calloused, and infinitely gentle as it cupped her face. His breath hitched, a small, sharp intake of air. Elena, he breathed, his voice a warning. Don't, she whispered, her eyes closing. Don't talk. Just stay. She initiated it. She, who had flinched from his touch, who had been broken by another man's brutality. She stood on her toes, her heart hammering, and she kissed him. It was a soft, searching, desperate kiss. It was not a kiss of passion, but of gratitude, of need. He was still for a beat, a statue of controlled power. Then, with a low groan that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he kissed her back. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He was solid, warm, and real. His mouth was not brutal, but it was not timid. It was possessive. It was a claim. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers. You are playing with fire. Mia cara, he whispered, his voice thick. Then let me burn, she replied, her voice shaking, but not with fear. She took his hand and led him from the terrace. She led him past the living room, past the library, and to the dark, quiet sanctuary of his bedroom. This time, she was in control. She stopped in the center of the room, lit only by the sliver of moonlight from the curtains. She turned to him. His face was a mask of shadows, his eyes dark, unreadable. He was waiting, giving her all the power. Her hands, shaking, went to the buttons of his shirt. One by one, she undid them. He didn't move. He just watched her, his chest rising and falling. She slid the shirt off his shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. His skin was warm. She splayed her hands on his chest, feeling the hard muscle, the steady, thrumming beat of his heart. She leaned in and rested her head there, just listening. His hands came up, burying themselves in her hair. "Elena," he said again. A plea. She lifted her head. She looked at him. Then she reached for the hem of her own t-shirt, his hands clamped down on her wrists, not hard, just stopping her. His eyes, they were the darkest they had ever been. He was asking permission. The man who took whatever he wanted was asking. She gave a small, jerky nod. Her voice was a breath. "Yes, Dante, yes." With an agonizing, reverent slowness, he lifted the shirt over her head. She stood before him in the moonlight, in her sweatpants and a simple bra, her scars, her bruises, her flaws, all laid bare. He didn't look at her with hunger. He looked at her with a kind of pained reverence. His hands, those rough, scarred hands, came up to her shoulders. He traced the line of her collarbone. He traced the faded, yellowing edge of the bruise on her arm. His touch was so light. It was a whisper. He unclipped her bra, his movements sure, and let it fall. She trembled, but she did not pull away. He kissed her. He kissed her as if she were the first woman he had ever kissed. His lips moved from her mouth, down her jaw, to the hollow of her throat. His reassurances were not whispered words, but the gentle, questing pressure of his mouth. He lifted her, as easily as he had that first night, and carried her to the bed. He laid her on the cool, high-count sheets and followed her down, his body a heavy, warm shadow over hers. "I will not hurt you," he rasped, his lips at her ear. "I know," she whispered. Every touch was purposeful. Every movement was a question, and she answered with a nod, a sigh, a small, shuddering intake of breath. Her fingers clutched his back, her nails digging into the hard muscle, holding on as the last of her fear gave way to a powerful, surging release. It was not the violent, selfish act she had known. It was slow. It was a conversation. It was a healing. When he finally moved inside her, she cried out, but it was not a cry of pain. It was a cry of arrival. Afterward. They lay tangled in the sheets, the moon a bright witness. Her body was thrumming, her skin sensitive, her mind quiet for the first time in years. She lay with her head on his chest, her ear pressed to his heart. The steady thump-thump was the most comforting sound in the world. She was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the faint, silvery scar she found on his ribs. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. She tilted her head back, looking up at his shadowed face. "You make me feel like I still matter." His arm, which was draped loosely over her, tightened. He pulled her closer, his hold fiercely protective. He kissed the crown of her head. "You were never the one who did not matter, Elena," he said. He held her all night. The next morning, the bubble of their quiet intimacy burst. They were having coffee on the terrace. A silence between them that was no longer empty, but full. Dante was in his suit, Elena in his robe. It felt, for a bizarre, fleeting moment, like they were a normal couple. Then Dante's private phone, the one he kept for his inner circle, vibrated on the glass table. He picked it up, his gaze still on Elena. "Pronto!" His face changed. The softness of the morning vanished, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the capo. "Where?" he said, his voice clipped. He listened. "How many?" He listened again. "Keep him there. I'm on my way." He ended the call and stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "What is it?" Elena asked, her hand flying to her throat. "Maddox," he said, his voice flat. "He's at the diner. He's furious you're not there. He's threatening Sal. He's waving his badge around like a club, intimidating your friends." "Oh, God," she breathed. "Sal, he's a good man. He'll be fine," Dante said, walking to the elevator. "I am going to handle this. Personally, Dante." "No," she said, following him. "He's a cop. It's a trap. He wants to arrest you. He is a bully, and his tantrum is over." He stepped into the elevator, his thumb on the button. He looked at her, his eyes boring into hers. "Stay here. Elena, lock the elevator. Do not leave this penthouse. Do not open the door for anyone. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered, terrified. "Be careful." The steel doors slid shut, leaving her alone in the vast, silent apartment. She paced for an hour. She tried to read. She tried to watch the news, but her mind was screaming. He had left her. He was gone, walking into a confrontation with a desperate, armed, and unhinged police officer. And she was here, safe, useless. She thought about Sal, who had always looked the other way for her, who had pretended not to see her bruises. Maddox was hurting him, and it was her fault. And then she thought of something else. Her apartment. Maddox was at the diner. He wasn't at her apartment. He was busy, making a scene. She wouldn't be able to get her clothes, her furniture. But there was one thing she had left behind, under her bed, in a worn cardboard box, was a small, leather-bound photo album. It held the only pictures she had of her mother. It held her high school graduation photo. It held the her that existed before Greg, before the bruises, before the fear. Dante had made her feel like that person still mattered. She needed it to show him, to prove to herself that Elena Rivera, the artist, the girl from Arizona, was still in there. It was the perfect time. He wasn't there. She knew, from watching Nico, that there was a service elevator, one that didn't require Dante's private key. She ran to the guest room and pulled on the sweatpants and t-shirt he had bought her. She found her sneakers. "Do not leave this penthouse." His words echoed in her ears, but her heart was pounding. Maddox was at the diner. The apartment was empty. She would be in and out in 10 minutes. It was a stupid, reckless, emotional decision. It was the most human thing she had done in months. She took the service elevator, her heart in her throat. She slipped out of the building's back entrance and hailed a cab. The ride was agonizing. Every minute stretched. She paid the driver and ran to her building. The new lock on the main door was a joke. She still had her key. She ran up the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She fumbled at her apartment door. The new lock was cheap. She got it open. The apartment was cold and smelled of dust and fear. The air was stale. He had shattered the door frame, and the landlord had tacked a piece of plywood over the worst of it. She ran to the bedroom. It was a wreck. He had come back. He had tossed the place, looking for her. Her mattress was half off the box spring. "No, no, no," she whimpered. She fell to her knees, shoving her arm under the bed, her fingers clawing at the dust bunnies. Her fingers hit a box. "Yes," she sobbed, pulling it out. The small, worn album was there. She clutched it to her chest, tears of relief streaming down her face. She had it. She had her past. She stood up, a survivor, ready to go back to her future. A floorboard creaked in the living room. Elena froze. The blood in her veins turned to ice. I'm armed," she whispered. A pathetic, obvious lie. A shadow fell across the bedroom doorway. He stepped into the room, blocking the only exit. He was not in uniform. He was in jeans and a black hoodie, but his badge was clipped to his belt. His face was a mask of triumphant, unhinged rage. He had not been at the diner, or if he had, it had been a distraction, a trap. He knew she would come back. "Hello?" "Elena," Greg Maddox sneered, his eyes glittering. "I knew you'd come home, sooner or later. Did you miss me?" The stale, cold air of the apartment was a tomb, and Greg Maddox was its keeper. "I knew it," he sneered, his voice a low, triumphant hiss. He took a step into the bedroom, and Elena took an instinctive step back, her spine hitting the wall. She clutched the photo album to her chest, a useless cardboard shield. "I knew you were screwing that thug, that wop bastard." "Shut up," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that?" He lunged, and it was too fast. His hand clamped down on her wrist. Twisting it, the photo album fell to the floor, spilling its contents. Pictures of her mother, of her high school graduation, scattered at his feet. "Look at this," he said, kicking a photo. "Pathetic. All this. For what? You think he's better than me? You think a killer is better than a cop?" "He's better than you," she spat, the words torn from her, fueled by a rage she didn't know she possessed. He's a monster. But at least he's honest about it. You hide behind that badge. You liar! She was not the same woman he had thrown against the wall. She was Dante's. She was her own. She brought her knee up, hard, aiming for his groin. She missed, her leg hampered by his grip, but she connected with his thigh. It was enough. He grunted, his grip loosening for just a second. Elena wrenched free. She didn't run for the door. She ran for the hallway, for the stairs, for the world. She didn't make it 2 steps. He grabbed her by her hair, yanking her back with a roar of pure, animalistic fury. He spun her around, and the open-handed slap was so hard her vision exploded in a flash of white. The sound of it, a sharp, wet crack, echoed in the tiny, dead room. She crumpled, her cheek on fire, the taste of blood in her mouth. "You fight me!" he screamed, his face a mask of unhinged, purple rage. "You fight me! After what I find, he's been tracking me. Your gangster boyfriend thinks he's so smart." He must have found one of the tracking devices Dante's men had planted. The trap she had walked into was not for her. It was for Dante. "He'll kill you," she gasped, trying to scramble backward. "He won't even find the body," Greg hissed. He was on her, his weight crushing. He grabbed her by the throat, his thumbs pressing into her windpipe. "You're mine. Elena, you've always been mine." Her world narrowed to a pinprick. She clawed at his hands, her nails digging into his skin, but his grip was iron. The room was dark, the edges of her vision fading to black. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. Her lungs were on fire. She was dying. She was dying in this cold, dark room, and the last face she would see was his. Then, a sound. It was not a knock. It was not a shout. It was not the splintering of wood. It was a small, precise, metallic click. The sound of a gun's hammer being pulled back in a silent room. Greg Maddox froze. His hands, which had been seconds from ending her life, went rigid, his eyes wide with the thrill of the kill, now widened with a different, more primal emotion, absolute terror. "Get your hands off her," a voice said. The voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was a flat, cold, dead thing. It was the sound of the grave. Greg's hands flew open. Elena collapsed, dragging in a desperate, ragged, searing breath that tore at her bruised throat. She rolled onto her side, coughing, choking, the world swimming in a haze of pain tears. She saw it all in a disconnected, slow-motion dream. Dante Morelli stood in the bedroom doorway. He was not alone. Nico was on his right. Another man, a mountain of muscle she didn't know, was on his left. All 3 held pistols. All 3 pointed not at Greg's head, but at his center mass. They were not aiming to warn. They were aiming to end. Greg was on his knees, his hands held high, his face a mask of disbelief and abject fear. "Morelli," he stammered. This isn't what it looks like. She's a missing person. I'm a police officer. I was rescuing her." Dante's eyes were not human. They were black, bottomless pits of such profound, cold murder that Elena felt her blood freeze. This was not the man who had kissed her knuckles, who had listened to her talk about art. This was the capo. This was the man who ended problems. Dante took a slow, deliberate step into the room. Greg scrambled backward, crab-walking until he hit the wall. Wait, you can't just kill a cop. There's rules." "You broke them," Dante whispered. He raised his pistol, his arm perfectly steady. He was aiming for Greg's face. Elena saw it. She saw the end. She saw the flash, the blood, the ruin, and she knew, in that instant, that she could not live with it. She could not be the reason. "Dante!" Her voice was a raw, broken croak. He didn't turn. His focus was absolute. "Dante, no!" She pushed herself up onto her elbows, the scattered photos of her past all around her. Her blood was dripping onto a picture of her mother. "Don't," she gasped. "Don't kill him, not for me, please." The silence stretched. Greg Maddox was crying, silent tears of terror streaming down his face. Dante's arm remained steady. His gaze was fixed on the man who had just tried to kill the only thing he protected. "Please," she whispered again, a sob catching in her throat. I don't want his death on you, on me." Please, Dante." For a long, agonizing moment, he did not move. Then, Elena saw his trigger finger, which had been tensed, relax. He let out a long, slow breath. The cold, murderous void in his eyes was replaced by a familiar, simmering rage. He turned his head, just slightly. His eyes met hers. He gave a single, curt, angry nod. He didn't lower the gun. He handed it to Nico, his eyes never leaving Greg. "Get out," he said to his men. "Capo?" Nico asked, his voice worried. "He is mine," Dante said, "but he is hers. Get out. Wait in the hall. And no one," he added, his voice dropping. "No one comes in this room until I come out." Nico and the other man hesitated, then nodded. They backed out of the room, their own weapons still raised, until the doorway was clear. It was just the three of them. Dante unbuttoned his suit jacket. He took it off, folding it with a strange, precise care, and laid it on the dresser. He unclipped his tie and pulled it loose. He undid his cuffs and began, slowly, to roll up the sleeves of his white shirt. Greg watched him, his eyes darting from Dante to Elena to the door. What are you doing?" Dante didn't answer. He finished rolling his sleeves, revealing his strong, scarred forearms, and then he lunged. It was not a gunshot. It was a fist. It was a blur of motion. Dante crossed the room in a single, predatory stride, and his fist connected with Greg's jaw. The sound was not a slap. It was a dull, heavy thud, like a butcher's mallet hitting frozen meat. Greg's head snapped back, hitting the drywall. Dante hit him again, a body shot, a short, brutal hook to the ribs. Greg crumpled. It was not a fight. It was a beating. It was a methodical, systematic, and terrifyingly silent punishment. Dante was a machine. He was silent. The only sounds were the wet, visceral impact of his fists and the choked, pathetic grunts from Greg. Dante hauled him up by his hoodie and slammed him against the wall. He hit him twice more in the face, hard, breaking his nose. Blood sprayed. "This," Dante hissed, his voice low and guttural, "is for her cheek." He hit him in the stomach. "This is for her ribs." He grabbed him by the throat, his hand a claw, mirroring the act Greg had just committed. But he wasn't choking him. He was just holding him, his feet dangling. "And this," Dante whispered, his face inches from Greg's bloody, terrified one, "is for every second you made her afraid." He threw him, like a sack of garbage, to the floor. Greg Maddox lay in a heap, broken, wheezing, sobbing. He was alive, but he was finished. Dante stood over him, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding, his white shirt splattered with Greg's blood. He looked down at the pathetic man. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He straightened his clothing, a bizarre gesture of normalcy in the midst of the chaos. Greg looked up, his one good eye swollen. You're calling the cops?" he wheezed. Good, I'm an officer. I'll tell them." "I am not calling the police," Dante said. He dialed a number. "I am calling the media," and he put the phone to his ear. "Miss Jensen, Dante Morelli. Yes, I'm well. I'm calling about that insurance file you received this morning. The flash drive? You found it." "Illuminating, good. I have something better. I have a confession." "Confession?" Greg gurgled. Trying to sit up, Dante pressed a button on his phone. He turned on the speaker. A recording played. It was Greg's voice. He was in a bar, the Rusty Nail, and he was drunk, and he was bragging. "So I tell the kid. That's a nice stash," Greg's recorded voice slurred. "It'd be a shame if it got logged into evidence. He paid me $5,000. $5,000, the idiot!" There was more. A brag about the girl he'd scared out of town 2 years ago. A complaint about how he was going to have to handle Elena. How she was getting to be a problem. Greg's face went from bloody to ashen. How did you? "My spy," Dante said simply, "is more convincing than yours." He spoke back into the phone. "I'm sending you my location. Miss Jensen, it's the apartment of the missing woman, Elena Rivera, the one who, according to this recording, Officer Maddox was planning to handle. You might want to bring a camera, and I would suggest you call the police department. Your pressure will ensure they send a car that isn't full of his friends." He hung up. He looked down at Greg. "You are a coward. You live like a rat. Now, you die like one." You said you wouldn't kill me," Greg sobbed. "I'm not," Dante said, picking up his suit jacket. "I'm just ending you." Sirens. In the distance, they were getting closer. Dante walked to Elena. She was still on the floor, surrounded by her life, trembling. He knelt before her, his bloody knuckles just inches from her face. His eyes, now, were just for her. They were worried. They were gentle. He didn't speak. He just began, methodically, to gather her photographs. He picked up the picture of her mother. He picked up the one of her as a smiling teenager. He placed them, one by one, back in the album. He held it out to her. She took it, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it. The sirens were deafening now. Red and blue lights flashed through the broken blinds. Heavy footsteps pounded in the hall. "Linwood PD, open up!" Dante didn't move. A new man, one Elena had never seen, stepped into the room. He was wearing a $3,000 suit and held a briefcase. "Miss Rivera?" the man said, his voice crisp. "I'm David Vescovi. I'm Mr. Morelli's attorney. The press is outside. The police are at the door. They're about to arrest Officer Maddox for the attempted murder of one of Mr. Morelli's associates, as well as a list of corruption charges." Vescovi handed her a sheaf of papers. "This is a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. He will not come near you again. He will not see the light of day again." "Take her," Dante said. He stood, his hand under Elena's elbow, and lifted her to her feet. He draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. It smelled of him, of wool and iron and safety. He didn't lead her out the door. He scooped her up. He carried her. Photo album clutched to her chest, out of the bedroom, into the living room, and past the two uniformed officers who were now cuffing a broken, weeping Greg Maddox. The flash of cameras exploded in the room, the reporter, Sarah Jensen, yelling questions. Dante didn't look at them. He didn't slow. He carried her down the stairs and into the night, shielding her face from the cameras with his own body, and put her into the back of his black SUV. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. He carried her from the elevator to the sofa. He set her down, and she collapsed, the adrenaline, the terror, the relief, all crashing down on her at once. She began to sob, a deep, racking, ugly storm of tears that came from her very soul. Dante knelt before her. He was a mess. His suit was ruined. His knuckles were raw. His shirt was stained. He looked like her avenging angel. He gently took a cloth from the bar, dampened it, and began to wipe the blood and tears from her face. "It's over. Elena," he whispered. He touched me," she gasped, the shame of it overwhelming. Dante's hand stilled. He leaned in, his gaze fierce. He kissed her cheek, where the new bruise was already forming. "He will not touch you." He kissed her throat, where the marks of Greg's fingers were. "He will not see you." He kissed her lips, a soft, chaste, desperate press. "He will not even breathe the same air as you, ever again." His voice was a vow. "No one will ever touch you like that again." That night, she was the one who came to him, after she had bathed, after the terror had subsided to a dull, aching tremor. She walked into his bedroom. He was standing by the window, his back to her, having just come from the shower himself. He wore only a pair of black sweatpants, his back a map of muscle and shadow. She walked up behind him and slid her arms around his waist. She pressed her cheek to his bare back, feeling his warmth, his strength. He tensed, his entire body going still. "Elena, stay with me," she whispered. Don't leave me alone tonight." He turned in her arms, his hands coming up to cup her face. He searched her eyes, looking for any hint of fear. She guided him. She took his hand and led him to the bed. It was not like the first time. This was not about discovery. This was about reclamation. She pushed him to sit, and she kissed him. She kissed him with a desperate, hungry need to erase the memory of Greg's mouth. Greg's hands. Her movements were slow, purposeful. She guided his hands to her waist, her shoulders, her hair. She was teaching him what she needed. She was showing him what she wanted. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of release. When their bodies finally joined, it was a slow, sacred, passionate dance. It was her pace, her rhythm. He let her lead, his body a solid, loving anchor, his gaze never leaving her face, worshiping her. It was a symphony of tears and pleasure, their bodies moving in sync, rewriting her history, one gentle, purposeful movement at a time. Afterward, they lay tangled, her head on his chest, the city lights a distant, glittering blur. The storm was over. The silence in the room was absolute. He stroked her hair, his touch a comfort she was finally learning to accept. "What do you want now?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in her ear. She was quiet for a long time, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She thought of her life, of the fear, the diner, the bruises, and she thought of this, the safety, the warmth. The man who had ended a war for her. She tilted her head, looking up at him. "To never wake up afraid," she whispered. His arm tightened around her, pulling her so close she could barely breathe, and he kissed the crown of her head. It was the only answer she needed. The world did not heal in a day. It healed in moments. It had been 6 weeks since the night in her apartment, 6 weeks since the flashbulbs and the sirens and the quiet, final click of handcuffs. Elena's life now was unrecognizable. The first week had been a blur of legal meetings with David Vescovi, Dante's lawyer, and long, quiet hours in the penthouse, which had begun to feel less like a fortress and more like a cocoon. Dante had made 2 calls. The first was to Dr. Alessi, who had returned, not as a medic, but as a referral service. The second call was to a woman named Maria. "She is the best," Dante had said, his voice quiet, as he handed Elena a cup of tea. "In the city, she works with people who have seen things. She does not ask questions about me. She only helps you." Elena had been terrified of that first therapy appointment. She was terrified to uncork the bottle of her trauma, afraid that if she started talking about Greg, she would never stop, that the darkness would consume her. But Maria was kind, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that saw through Elena's defenses. "This is not about him. Elena," she had said in their first session, "this is not about the monster. This is about the survivor. We are going to find her, and we are going to give her the world." And so, twice a week, a black car, driven by one of Dante's silent men, would take her to a quiet, discreet office building, and she would talk, she would learn, she would slowly, painfully, begin to untangle the knots that Greg had tied around her soul. Dante, in his infinite, careful wisdom, had given her a second gift. "Maria said you need purpose," he'd announced one night. Not a question, but a statement of fact, as he was shrugging off his suit jacket. Yes, I can't just sit here in your beautiful, expensive cage. Dante, I need to do something. I feel useless." "You are not useless," he said, his voice a low growl as he unbuttoned his cuffs. "But you are right. You need to work. I have a place for you, if you want it." It was not one of his casinos. It was not one of his shipping companies. It was the Linwood Women's Shelter, a large, slightly run-down brick building that, unbeknownst to the city, was one of his primary charitable foundations. It was run by a fierce, no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Sophia, who, as Dante explained, also hates cowards. Elena had started as a volunteer, making coffee and sorting donations, but within a week, she was sitting with the women. She was listening. She was holding their hands as they cried. She, who had been so broken, was now a source of strength. She knew the look in their eyes. She knew the shame, the fear, the way they flinched at loud noises. And she knew, now, that they could escape. She would come home from the shelter, emotionally exhausted but spiritually full, and the penthouse would be quiet. Dante lived a public life of calculated ruthlessness. She would see his name in the papers, linked to some new business deal, some political arm twisting. He was still the capo, the shadow that ruled the city, to the world. He was a cold, hard, dangerous man, but that was his day job. At night, he would come home. He would find her in the library, reading or on the terrace, sketching. He would say nothing, just loosen his tie, and the silence would be full of his presence. He would bring her a glass of wine, his hand brushing hers. He would sit, not beside her, but across from her, and simply watch her, as if her existing, her being safe, was the only thing he needed. And later, in the darkness of his room, the cold capo would disappear completely. He would be the man who held her, who traced the fading, yellow-green lines of her bruises with a feather-light touch, his lips following the path of his fingers, as if he could kiss the memory of the pain away. He was the man who woke in the night if her breathing hitched, his hand instantly finding hers, grounding her, whispering, "You are safe. I am here." He was her anchor, her protector, and she, in turn, was his softness, his one secret, human vice. But there was one last ghost. The trial of Officer Gregory Maddox began on a cold, gray Tuesday. It was a media circus. The case of the hero cop turned corrupt demon had electrified the city. Dante's attorney, Vescovi, had shielded her from the pre-trial madness, but she had to testify. Dante was at her side the entire time. He sat in the front row, directly behind her. As she sat with the prosecutor, he wore a dark, conservative suit, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He looked like a titan of industry, not a mafia boss, but the power rolling off him was so potent that no reporter dared approach him. When Elena's name was called, she stood, her legs feeling like water. She looked back at him, her eyes wide with panic. Dante did not smile. He did not nod. He simply met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw an ocean of strength. "I am here. You will not fall." She walked to the stand. "Please state your full name for the court." "Elena Rivera." Her voice was a small, reedy whisper. "Speak up, Miss Rivera," the judge said, not unkindly. She took a breath. She looked at Greg. He was a stranger. He was clean-shaven, his hair cut, but he had lost weight. His eyes were hollow, dead. He was in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He was no longer the monster. He was just a pathetic, weak man, stripped of his power, and she was no longer his victim. She looked at the prosecutor. "Elena Rivera," she said, her voice clear and loud, echoing in the silent courtroom. For 2 hours, she told her story. She told them about the diner. She told them about the stalking. She told them about the night he broke down her door. And she told them, her voice shaking but never breaking, about the final, brutal attack in her apartment. Greg's defense attorney was slick. He tried to paint her as a scorned lover. He tried to paint her as a gold digger, a woman who had left a good cop for a rich criminal. "So you are, in fact, living with Mr. Dante Morelli, the reputed head of the Morelli crime family?" "I am under Mr. Morelli's protection," Elena said, her voice like ice. "Because Officer Maddox, a man who swore an oath to protect, tried to kill me." But her testimony was just the beginning. Dante's work had been thorough. The prosecutor brought out Sarah Jensen, the reporter, who confirmed the timeline of the phone call. The recording itself was played. The entire courtroom sat in stunned, horrified silence, listening to Greg brag about his crimes, his casual, cruel dismissal of his victims. Then came the other victims, the woman from 2 years ago, the one Greg had scared out of state. Dante had found her. Vescovi had flown her back. She walked to the stand, a small, blonde woman, and told an almost identical story of harassment, abuse, and terror. Then Spider, the drug dealer, who had been given a deal to turn on his former protector. The evidence was not a trickle. It was a flood. It was an avalanche. By the end of the second day, the jury was out for only 30 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed in the courtroom. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Elena felt a single tear roll down her cheek. She didn't move. She just sat, listening to the words that were, finally, setting her free. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the winter air was sharp and clean. The press was a mob, a wall of yelling, flashing lights. Elena stood, dazed, shaking, the sound of the verdict still ringing in her ears. Dante was beside her in an instant. His men formed a flying wedge, a silent human shield, pushing the reporters back. He said nothing. He just shrugged off his heavy, black wool overcoat and wrapped it around her. It was warm from his body, and it smelled of him. He pulled the collar up around her face, shielding her from the cameras, and tucked her against his side. "You did that," he murmured, his voice for her ears only, as he guided her through the sea of chaos. Elena, you ended him." His car was waiting. He put her inside, and the door shut, plunging them into a sudden, blessed silence. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat, his coat clutched around her, and watched the city lights blur past as they drove home. That night, she found him on the terrace. He was staring out at the city he owned. "It's over," she whispered, coming to stand beside him. "Yes," he said. "I should be happy. Or relieved. I am. But I just feel—" She wrapped her arms around her waist. "I'm afraid." He turned to her, his brow furrowed. "He is gone. He will be in a cell for 20 years. He will never touch you." "I'm not afraid of him," she said, looking up at him. "I'm afraid of being this person, the woman from the courthouse, the victim, the survivor. I don't want to be defined by what he did to me. I don't want to be the girl who was saved by Dante Morelli." Dante's face softened. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. "You are not a victim, Elena," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl. "A victim is what he tried to make you. You are a survivor. That is what you did. You fought him. You testified. You put him in a cage. That is your strength. Not his. Yours." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "And you are not the girl who was saved by Dante Morelli. You are Elena. You are the woman who walked into my diner and was too strong to be broken. You are the woman who sleeps in my bed and makes me human." He pulled back, his dark eyes searching hers, his gaze full of a raw emotion he rarely showed. "And you are mine. If you still want to be." She didn't have to answer. She slid her hands up his chest, locked them around his neck, and pulled him down. Her kiss was his answer. It was deep and slow, and it was not a kiss of gratitude. It was a kiss of possession. It was a kiss of equals. The next day, Elena walked into the guest room, the one with the soft, cream-colored walls. "Mrs. Bianchi," she said, finding the older woman, I need this room, and I need paint." Dante came home that night to find the door to the guest room closed. He found Elena in the kitchen, her hair tied up in a messy bun, a smudge of bright, cerulean blue on her cheek. "What is this?" he asked, his lips twitching, as he pointed to the paint. "It's my studio," she said, her eyes shining with a light he had never seen before. I'm moving in. Officially?" She had finally, truly moved in. She had turned the pristine, empty guest room into a space of chaotic, beautiful life. Canvases were stacked against the walls, jars of brushes and tubes of paint covered the floor, and she began to paint. She painted the desert she remembered from her childhood. She painted the Linwood skyline, not as a cold, glass prison, but as a glittering, vibrant promise. She painted the faces of the women at the shelter, capturing their pain, but more, their strength. Dante would find her there, lost in her work, covered in paint, and he would just watch, his heart aching with a fierce, protective pride he had not known he was capable of. One night, weeks later, the first real night of spring, she found him in the library. He was at his desk, the light from his lamp casting a golden glow on the dark wood. She walked up behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. He didn't tense. His own hand came up, covering hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Come with me," she whispered. "I have work," he murmured. "The work can wait," she said, her lips at his ear. "I have something to show you." She led him by the hand through the penthouse to a door she had never opened, a door that led to a narrow, winding staircase. "Where are we going?" he asked, a rare note of curiosity in his voice. "You'll see." The staircase opened onto the roof. But it was not a roof of tar and gravel. It was a garden. In the months she had been healing, in the weeks she had been fighting, he had built her a secret world. He had built her an oasis. 30 stories in the sky. There were potted olive trees, strings of soft, white lights. There were trellises covered in blooming, fragrant jasmine in the center. A simple wooden bench overlooked the entire, glittering expanse of the city. Elena stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned to him, her eyes shining with tears. "Dante, how?" "While you were painting," he said, his voice a low rumble. I remembered what you said, about the desert, about needing air. I could not give you the desert, so I gave you the sky." She looked at him, her heart so full it felt like it would burst. The capo, the killer, the man of shadows, had built her a garden. She walked to the center, under the jasmine, the lights of the city a galaxy at her feet. She turned, a small smile playing on her lips. She held out her hand. He came to her, his large, powerful form a silhouette against the night. She took his face in her hands, her paint-stained fingers stroking his rough jaw. "No more bruises?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Just love." Dante's eyes closed, a tremor running through him. He leaned into her touch, a beast gentled. He took her hands, turning them over, and kissed her palms, right over the paint. He kissed her wrists, where the faint, silvery traces of old scars remained. He kissed her lips, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of promises, of forever. And then he knelt. The captain of Linwood, the man who knelt for no one, knelt for her, on the roof he had built, under the stars. He pressed his lips to the fading, barely there shadow on her cheek. "Only my love," he promised, his voice a raw, broken, and beautiful vow. "Only my love will ever touch you again." "Thank you so much for listening to Let Me See the Bruises," Mafia Boss said, then helped her undress with trembling hands. "I truly hope you enjoyed the story. We would love to hear from you. Please comment and let us know what part of the world you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of passion and danger. We're waiting to read your thoughts, so please share them in English. We'll see you in the next story.